Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the data behind an absolute financial earthquake. We're unpacking the recent 2026 stock collapse of India's biggest IT firm, Tata Consultancy Services. You know, a company that pretty much everyone considered absolutely bulletproof. Well, buckle up, because we're going to jump straight into the structural, the technological, and the internal factors that caused this truly historic crash.
Over 9 lakh crore rupees. Just let that sink in for a second. That is the staggering amount of market value completely wiped off the map. To put that massive number into perspective, TCS's market capitalization plummeted from over 16.47 lakh crore down to just 7.35 lakh crore. We aren't just talking about a market dip here. This is a colossal destruction of wealth that honestly caught global investors completely off guard.
The sheer gravity of the situation is stunning. We're looking at a plunge of over 50% from its all-time high of 4,592 rupees, which it hit back in August 2024. Just since the start of 2026 alone, the stock tumbled around 33%. Now, for a Nifty 50 heavyweight, a stock that basically holds a too-big-to-fail status in the Indian market, a crash of this magnitude is entirely unprecedented. There's really no other word for it. And the contrast here is just wild. On one hand, you have TCS, literally India's largest IT company and the dominant anchor of the Nifty 50 index. Its systemic importance is massive. I mean, when TCS bleeds, it drags down the broader market right along with it. Yet despite being this untouchable giant, it has just been bleeding heavily throughout 2026. So we really have to ask ourselves, what went so incredibly wrong?
Well, every mystery has a tipping point, right? That specific moment where the dam just completely breaks. For TCS, that moment arrived in the summer. So the first crucial piece of evidence we need to look at is what exactly triggered that dramatic sell-off on June 19. If we trace the timeline back, you see the peak in August 2024. The downtrend slowly begins creeping in at the start of 2026, but the fatal blow? That lands squarely on June 18th and 19th. By the end of June, the stock is scraping multi-year lows near $2,033. The pressure had definitely been building for months, but it took a single global event to spark a total panic. And that spark was courtesy of Accenture. On June 18th, Accenture suddenly cut its full-year 2026 revenue guidance down to just 3 to 4%. Wall Street reacted ruthlessly, crashing Accenture stock by a massive 18%. Now, because Accenture acts as a bellwether for global IT spending, this sent absolute shockwaves through the entire Indian IT sector. The very next day, TCS shares gapped down sharply, dropping over 6% intraday. Since TCS gets roughly 30% of its revenue from the banking, financial services, and insurance sector, an area Accenture specifically highlighted as pulling back on spending, investors just hammered the panic button. But let's be real. A single bad day on the stock market doesn't magically erase 9 lakh crore rupees in value. We have to look deeper. Is this just a temporary cyclical slowdown, like maybe a bad quarter or two? Or is the actual business model fundamentally broken? To truly understand this crisis, we have to understand the machine itself. Labor arbitrage. That is the absolute bedrock of the traditional IT sector. For decades, this model was incredibly predictable. You recruit thousands of engineers, you train them, you assign them to high-volume maintenance tasks, and you bill your clients for their human hours. Basically, headcount directly translated into revenue. It was a money-printing machine.
But that old billing-by-the-hour model, it is slamming headfirst into a brand new reality. We're talking about the AI deflation threat. Generative AI is rapidly automating those repetitive coding and back-office tasks, and it's doing it almost instantly. Clients are now looking at IT firms and asking a very simple, very dangerous question. If AI can do this in a fraction of the time, why on earth should we pay your old, expensive human hourly rates? This shift is drastically shrinking billable hours and just destroying their pricing power.
And you better believe the smart money is noticing this shift. Foreign institutional investors, FIIs, have aggressively dropped their tech allocation to an all-time low of just 7.3%. They are pulling their money out fast, simply because traditional IT service platforms currently lack a strong, defensible moat against this massive AI wave. So where exactly is all that capital fleeing to? Well, funding for traditional IT services is actively shrinking, while capital for AI infrastructure, things like AI data centers and semiconductors, is absolutely surging. The tech budgets aren't necessarily disappearing. They're just bypassing the third-party legacy IT firms entirely and going straight into specialized AI platforms and cloud security. Okay, let's pivot for a second.
External technological threats are one thing, but what hidden pressures are squeezing the company from the inside? Because the data reveals a fascinating internal struggle that totally compounded this market crash. You see, TCS doesn't operate in a vacuum. It's a huge part of the massive Tata Group. And behind closed doors, the heavy burden of funding its parent company, Tata Sons, has been quietly putting an immense strain on the IT giant.
This imbalance is honestly wild to look at. A massive 84% of Tata Sons' total dividend income comes directly from this one single company, TCS. The rest of the vast Tata empire, it contributes just 16%. TCS is essentially the golden goose holding up the entire financial structure of the parent entity.
So the crucial takeaway here is where that money is actually going. Those massive dividend payouts from TCS are largely being used to fund heavy losses in Tata's other corporate ventures, like their aviation and e-commerce wings. And to maintain these massive payouts during a period of really slow global IT demand, TCS management had to enforce incredibly strict financial discipline internally. And look, this immense financial strain inevitably builds into a human crisis. Historically, senior leadership churn at the company sat at a really stable 4 to 5%. But in FY26, it spiked to a shocking 16%. That is a historic flight of long-tenured, experienced executives walking out the door. Why did they all leave? The mechanics of this internal crisis are pretty brutal. We're talking about a 16% exodus among the top 1,800 leaders. Amid all this corporate restructuring, deep cuts were made to compensation. In fact, target variable pay dropped to less than 10% for the last 2 financial years. So the executives who stayed behind were forced to carry a crushing operational burden, but with slashed bonuses. It was basically a bottleneck that started breaking the system right from the inside. So facing AI deflation externally and this intense financial and leadership squeeze internally, can India's IT anchor actually survive this massive structural reset? We need to weigh all this crushing evidence against the company's undeniable legacy. Because we have to be fair and weigh all the facts here. TCS is still the largest IT company in India. Period. It's a dominant Nifty 50 heavyweight with that too big to fail status we talked about earlier. And they aren't just sitting still taking hits. They're aggressively attempting a strategic pivot. Just recently, they secured a massive multi-year digital transformation deal with SKF. Even more notably, they're launching a 100-megawatt Hypervault AI data center initiative in a major partnership with OpenAI and AMD. They are desperately trying to capture that next-generation tech spending. However, despite those moves, the institutional pessimism out there is incredibly thick. The market is already pricing in a harsh new reality. Global brokerages are deeply concerned. JP Morgan actually cut their PE multiples by 25%, and Jefferies warned of a potential 30 to 65% sector re-rating, forecasting only a 6% compound annual growth rate. The prevailing sentiment is that AI pricing pressure is going to permanently depress long-term earnings for legacy IT. So it all comes down to this core dilemma. On one side, you have the legacy challenge, dealing with a dying, deflating labor arbitrage model, relentless parent company dividend pressures, and a crippled senior leadership team. But on the other side, you have the growth imperative, the absolute desperate need to successfully pivot into proprietary, defensible AI infrastructure before it is entirely too late. Which brings us to our final provocative question to wrap things up today. Based on everything we've unpacked, the 9 lakh crore wipeout, the AI deflation threat, that Accenture trigger, and the internal leadership turmoil, is this just a temporary, painful cyclical dip, or are we actually witnessing a permanent structural reset for this Indian IT giant? Based on the evidence we've laid out from the data, I'll let you decide for yourself. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the data.